Hi, everybody. I'm Cyril Vanier. It's great to have you with us. So this doesn't happen often. Donald Trump gives in to criticism and signs an executive order to stop separating immigrant children from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border. He spoke to supporters in Minnesota just a few hours after what is a major reversal for the president. He had spent days blaming Democrats and insisting he couldn't do anything about these separations. However, he still promises to be as tough as ever on undocumented immigrants trying to enter the U.S.
So the Democrats want open borders. Let everybody come in. Let everybody pour in. We don't care. Let them come in from the Middle East. Let them come in from all over the place. We don't care. We're not going to let it happen. And by the way, today I signed an executive order. We're going to keep families together, but the border is going to be just as tough as it's been.
Mr. Trump's executive order does nothing to help reunite the more than 2,000 children already taken from their parents, and it aims to keep immigrant families in detention indefinitely.
We're going to have strong, very strong borders, but we're going to keep the families together. I didn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated. There's a problem that's gone on for many years, as you know, through many administrations. And we're working very hard on immigration. It's been just left out in the cold. People haven't dealt with it, and we are dealing with it.
Joining me now, Peter Matthews, a professor of political science at Cypress College, and Brian Claypool, criminal defense attorney and civil rights litigator. Peter, let's start with you. The president says he doesn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated. We just heard him. How come he's not reuniting the 2,000-plus children who've already been separated and are still separated from their parents?
And how come it took him several days to come to not liking it when he imposed that several days ago? And the fact is that he's not reuniting these children with the parents, and that's the most egregious human rights violation, Cyril, and he has to be called on that, and that's got to stop, and he's got to change his ways. Otherwise, the United States has lost its reputation, its soft power of example, leading the world through democracy and rule of law. It's being shattered by this president, and it's very unfortunate what's happened recently.
Brian, looking at this going forward now, with this new executive order that was signed on Wednesday, now children are going to be held with their parents. Is that fully legal?
Well, yeah, it is under the executive order, but here's the problem. This is just a stopgap measure because President Trump said, we're going to keep the families together, but subject to existing law. He threw that caveat in there. So he could have gone a couple steps further. For example, Cyril, he could have put in the executive order that the children could stay with the parents beyond the 21 days. Remember, there's a case out there, the Flores versus Reno case, the Supreme Court case, that says the kids can't stay with the parents beyond 21 days in detention. So why didn't President Trump go beyond 21 days and say these kids could stay for longer? Because you know what's going to happen at the end of the day? The 22nd day is going to come, Cyril, and guess what? Some of these kids are going to be separated again from their parents, and he's going to blame it on existing law, which is fiction. And in my mind, that is the U.S. government kidnapping children.
They have flat out. I want to make sure I follow. Under this new executive order, for families, say, that are detained at the border today, families with children, you're telling me that 20 days from now, under U.S. case law, the kids will have to be taken away from their parents?
Correct. Under current case law in the United States, kids can only go with their parents to, remember, the parents go to a federal detention facility. So the kids are going to now go with the parents to the federal detention facility, but under this case, they can only stay for 21 days. This executive order does not address what happens after those 21 days. Where do the kids go? My guess is going to be that President Trump's going to throw his arms up and say, wait a minute, I'm handcuffed again, and we've got to take these kids away after the 21st day.
But the administration is moving to try and overturn that case, right? The Flores settlement that you mentioned.
Yeah, but that can take a long time, Cyril. That could take months or years. So the easiest way to go about doing this, twofold. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security could craft new regulations within the next few weeks that address this issue and extend the time that kids could stay with their parents. There could be a new law passed by Congress in the next couple of months that addresses this issue. Remember, one important point for the viewers. This case that came down years ago, Cyril, it was never meant to be the law forever in the United States. It's what's called de facto law. It was a framework through which then the federal government was supposed to come in and create more fluid, clear, comprehensive immigration law. Our government has failed in that regard.
Yeah, and that didn't happen. Real quick, how long does it typically take to appear before the judge when you are being prosecuted as a migrant?
Great question. I think the average right now is about 51 days if it's just a misdemeanor for illegal entry. If they've got to do more vetting and they've got to look at your background more to see if you have any ties to gang violence, that could take a lot longer. But clearly, the key is it's well beyond the 21 days, and nothing in this executive order safeguards those kids or prevents them from being separated again on the 22nd day.
Okay, so unless that case is overturned, we are just 3 weeks away from having the same problem happen over again. The very problem that this executive order was supposed to fix. Peter, why did the president backtrack on this particular issue? I mean, yes, he took a lot of heat, but he is famously the president who says, you know, I can take the heat, I can take the criticism.
The midterm elections, Cyril, because the midterm elections are different than the 2020 election. He could hold on to his base and win once again in 2020, possibly, if the other vote is split. With the midterm elections, these members of Congress, the Republican members, are facing direct opposition, and voters like Democrats are going to go out in droves and vote against this president by voting against that member of Congress and putting a Democrat in. If the president loses the House to Democrats, he could actually be in danger of impeachment. That's why he's doing these kinds of things, and to save himself, basically. And you know what the gentleman, as Brian said, is that this can be solved, I would say, by having supervision. The type of release situation that President Obama had going was much more humane. It was supervised release, where you can keep track of these folks with an ankle bracelet, perhaps, to make sure they're not going to escape or leave and not come back for their hearing. There's other ways to do it to keep it a humane situation for the children and the parents, and Trump didn't even consider that whatsoever.
Well,
He's sending a message.
So consider the dilemma as it was presented by Donald Trump. Listen to this.
The dilemma is that if you're weak, which some people would like you to be, if you're really, really pathetically weak, the country's going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma. Perhaps I'd rather be strong, but that's a tough dilemma.
So, Peter, consider that dilemma or that argument by the president, if you will, because I suspect that's where a lot of people are going to struggle with this issue, you know, feeling that you do have to protect the border on the one hand, but you have to be humane on the other. Is it a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation?
No, because he's not looking at the real causes of illegal immigration. It has to do with economics. It has to do with NAFTA, with free trade, with outsourcing our jobs to cheap labor in Mexico, and also driving with NAFTA, dumping American corporate corn on the Mexican farmer and driving them out of business, and the wages not being high enough to be paid for these factory workers that have been working for American factories over there, and they come across the border to survive, basically. He's not looking at insisting on higher wages in Mexico before he actually has a NAFTA agreement and higher environmental standards to have an even fair trade playing field in that manner. And that's been done before in Europe, and it worked very well with the northern and southern European countries coming together in the common market by having higher wages in the southern countries. He's not looking at the real cause of illegal immigration. It's not, they don't come here for the weather or for the food or the beaches. They're coming here for jobs, and you should really address that issue and not just look at, they're going to come here and overwhelm us, or we have to be strong and block them at the border and build a wall. And I think that's completely unnecessary for him to look at it that way.
Well, since you mentioned Europe, we will discuss that. They're struggling. The European Union is struggling with the migration issue as well. We'll discuss that in the next segment. But Brian, from your legal standpoint, what do you think of that dilemma that Donald Trump presented? I have to either be hard or I have to be kind, but I can't be both.
Yeah, that's pretty pathetic. I'll tell you why. He could separate the two issues real easily. He's trying to make the United States believe if all these illegal immigrants come in, we're going to get gangsters, and they're all thugs, and I think he described them as infesting our country. That was so offensive, because my daughter, by the way, is half Mexican. My daughter's mom, her family came from Mexico and migrated here. So what he's trying to say is, well, everybody coming in is bad. But what he can do, Cyril, is he can separate vetting all illegal immigrants.
Brian, in fairness, he's saying people who are crossing the border illegally are bad, which is not quite the same thing, in fairness to the president.
But they're not all bad. What he's failing to address is that you can properly vet illegal immigrants entering our country illegally. You can properly vet them in a humane way. He can't separate those two. He thinks that you have to treat these people in a really bad way, steal the kids, separate the kids in order to vet. He's just doing that to send a message. But this could be a humane process, Cyril, in which we sit down, we look at the family as one unit, and we determine, do they qualify for asylum? Do they have any red flags? That can be done in a human way. He just doesn't want to see it that way.
Peter, Brian was telling us a few minutes ago that Congress could settle this, right? We're referring to the Flores settlement, and there's this sort of unsettled gray area that was left by the courts for the government to fix, which it hasn't done. Donald Trump and the Republicans control Congress. Will they fix the immigration issue in the U.S.?
They're having a problem fixing it as of the compromise yesterday. They couldn't come up with on the vote tomorrow. It'll probably fail because the right-wing Republicans and the more moderate ones disagree completely on what the solution should be. There are two bills being proposed rather than one. And I don't think they're going to settle it right now, and they're going to rely on the fact the president reversed himself and as a solution for right now. And it's completely egregious to even think that all these folks are bad and for him to project them as criminals as he did and rapists as he did in the campaign. And this is ridiculous, as Brian said. There's a way to vet people. And don't forget, people coming for political asylum are coming on a different basis than economic refugees. They're political refugees, and they have a right under international law and the U.S. Agreed-upon treaties to have a proper evaluation, and their children cannot be taken away from them while they're waiting on political asylum decision. This is where he's breaking international law, to say the least.
Yeah, and Brian, I will want an answer and an explanation from you on that very question next hour. You guys stick around. We'll speak to you next hour. Thank you very much. Got more questions for you.